Hey guys, welcome back. We'll continue with Automate the Boring Stuff with Python, and in this video we are going to cover web scraping. You can read the chapter for free by heading over to automatetheboringstuff.com, or if you prefer a physical copy of the book, you'll find a link in the description down below. Python provides a number of different modules we can use in order to work with websites using Python. The first one is the Webbrowser module that automatically comes with Python and which can be used to open a browser to a specific page. Let's head over to our new code editor and let's open the REPL. And to start using the Webbrowser module, we need to import it first. After that, we can call the open method on Webbrowser and pass the URL that we want to open. So for example, inventwithpython.com. Once we confirm that, we are going to head over to that website. So the Webbrowser module automatically opens that website we provide. And that's pretty much everything the module does for us. However, what we learned so far is already enough to build a small program, which we can use to easily open addresses on Google Maps. So what we want to achieve is that we pass a certain command to our command line with an address, and this address should then be opened in Google Maps. So we are providing the name of the program, map_it, and then we provide an address, and once we press enter, this should then open Google Maps with that specific address and show us where that address is located. Let's see how we can build that program. To implement that program, we are going to import the Webbrowser module, also the system module, and we are also going to import the paperclip module. If you haven't installed the paperclip module yet, you can do that in Windows by opening the command line and typing in pip install paperclip. And this is going to install the paperclip module. After that, we are checking for the command line arguments that we provide when we run the command, and we are checking whether there's more than one command. We need more than one command because we of course are going to provide the name of the program, map_it, but then also the address that we want to search for. So therefore the number of arguments should be larger than one. And in that case, we are going to get all the arguments except for the first one, which of course is the name of the program that we're executing. And those ones are going to be returned as a list. And then we're using the join command to basically join that together to a string. And each part of the address will be separated by a white space. If only one argument is provided, so if we don't provide an address, but just type in the name of the program, then we are going to get the address from the paperclip module. That means if we already copied an address, that will be used in its place. And either way, whether we provided the address actively or whether we just copied it before, we are then going to call Webbrowser open, and we're going to pass the URL to Google Maps to it, and we are appending the address at the end. One additional step we need to take in order to run the program from the command line is the following. We need to create a separate batch file ending in BAT, and we need to include this part of the code here. So we need to make sure that we can execute our program from the command line by specifying the path to that specific Python file. And then we are going to save that in the same folder as our program, so inside the mu code directory in this case. And we are just going to call it map_it.bat. And once that's the case, we can open the command line and type in map_it followed by the address, and that is going to open a new browser window with that specific address. And that program can save us quite a bit of time because we don't have to actively navigate to the Google Maps page and type in the address there, but we can just issue that command from the command line interface. Now when we want to download files from the internet, we can use the requests module. The requests module is an external module that we need to install. So inside of the mu code editor, we can click on the gear icon. And in third-party packages, we can add requests and click on OK. And that's going to install the requests module and also some dependent modules, for example urllib3. Now once we installed that, let's open the REPL and type in import requests. And if you don't get an error message, that means the requests module was installed properly. Now in order to work with the requests module, we first of all need to get some file from the web. So in this case here we are calling get on requests, and we're passing the URL to a text file to it. we're going to store that back in the res variable. Now once we've done that, we can first of all have a look at the type of object that we are getting back when requesting that resource. And here we can see that we get back a response model. So basically we get back the response from that particular website we are addressing. Let's next check if everything worked okay. So meaning that we got back the proper response. And for that we are going to request the code for the OK status. And we're going to store that back in res.status code. And here we get back true. So that means the request worked properly and we got a response back from our request. And in general, HTTP provides a number of different status codes that signal whether a request was successful or not. When a request is successful, the code 200 will be returned, which is the case here. Let's next have a look at the number of characters of the text that we got back. And we can see that's quite a large number here, 178,000. And then we can go ahead and print out, for instance, the first 250 characters. If we do that, we can see we get back the text from the website. So here this is regarding the project Gutenberg, ebook of Romeo and Juliet. And so we basically downloaded that information from the internet and are then referencing it here. Now as we saw, we used the status code function in order to check whether the resource we were requesting was actually valid. But there's an easier way to do that. Let's assume we are going to request an invalid website that does not exist, and we're going to store that back in the res variable. Now next we can call raise for status on res, and this function here is going to raise an error if there was any issue requesting that resource. So in this case here we get a 404 client error because the resource we were requesting under this URL could not be found. So that's a very easy and straightforward way to check whether or not a certain resource we are requesting exists. Now once we request a resource, we can also save it on our hard drive. And for that we can follow what we already learned about working with files. So again, we are going to import the requests module, we're going to get a certain web page, and we're going to raise for status to check if there's an error or not requesting that web page. Then we need to open a new text file that we want to create, and it's important to add WB as a second argument, which stands for write binary. That's important whenever we request resources from the internet. And then we can use the iter content method on res, which returns chunks of the content on each iteration through the loop, and that's going to allow us to basically download the content and then write that to our file that we created. And of course at the end we need to make sure that we close the file. Now let's run the program, and of course we don't get anything back, but if we take a look at the file that was generated, we can see basically the same content as before has been retrieved and now written to this file. So that can be very useful whenever we want to download some resource from the internet and then save it in a text file. Now we can also directly select certain elements from a website using code. But before we do that, let's cover some basics of HTML. If we navigate to a website, we can open the developer tools. On Windows, that's possible by pressing F12 in Chrome. And here we have a number of different tabs available to us. We can, for example, select the Elements tab and have a look at the individual elements. We can also select an element by hovering on this element over here. And then we can hover over, for example, this block of text and then have a closer look at that particular part of HTML. We can also right-click on a page and then select View as Source. And that's going to display the entire HTML page as source code. And we can have a look at the individual elements of our page. And we're going to use that in a little bit to select individual elements. Now when we want to select any content from our website, it's important that we don't work with regular expressions because it can be quite difficult to match the proper HTML tag, for instance. Rather than doing that, we can use a dedicated module in Python, which is the Beautiful Soup module. Now as an example for working with Beautiful Soup, we are going to work with an example HTML file, which we can create by creating a new file tab here in the Mu code editor and then typing out this HTML syntax here and then saving that as example.html. Let's start working with Beautiful Soup, and for that we need to ensure that we install the module. Inside of the Mu code editor, we can click on the gear icon on the bottom right side, select third-party packages, and then add BS4 to it and click OK. And that's going to install Beautiful Soup and also some dependencies. Now once installed, we can import the requests module and also the Beautiful Soup module. Then we're going to query a website here, store that in res, and also check that we don't have an error. And then we can call Beautiful Soup on the BS4 module and pass the rest of the website object that we got back and also HTML parser to it, and we're going to store that back in no starch soup. Let's have a look at that type, and we can see it's a Beautiful Soup object. Now let's work with our example.html page that we generated before. To do that, we can open that and store it in example file, and then again we can call Beautiful Soup on the BS4 module, pass example file to it and HTML parser as a second argument, and we can have a look at the type. So we see again this is a Beautiful Soup object. Now using Beautiful Soup, we can use a number of different CSS selectors to select the appropriate attributes. Here a number of different options available to us. So for instance, we can have a look at a div HTML tag. We can select an attribute with the ID author, or we can also select all elements, for example, that use a CSS class attribute named notice. So to apply that, let's again use Beautiful Soup to read our example file. And then we are going to select all elements with the ID author. So if we have a look at our HTML file, we can see that in this case here, we are setting the ID author on this span tag here. And then we can check out the type. So here we get back a result set of elements. We can have a look at the length, and we can see we get back 1 because we have exactly one element with the ID author. And then we can, for example, get back the string of the element. Now the element is saved as a list, therefore we need to reference the entry at position 0. And here we get exactly that span tag that we see up here. And we can also call get text on it, and that's going to give us back specifically that text inside of that span tag. Now to apply what we learned so far about the requests and the Beautiful Soup module, we can download every comic from the XKCD website. The XKCD website shows different comics that are focused on programming topics. So if you head over to xkcd.com, you can have a look at those. There are a number of different comics we can look at, and we're going to write a program that's going to download all of them. To do that, we first need to import the requests module, the OS module, and the Beautiful Soup module. Then we specify the URL as a variable, and we're going to create a directory called XKCD where we're going to store the comics. We then go ahead and loop over all the different comics, and we are going to use Beautiful Soup to get the text on the various pages. After that, we are going to call select on soup, which is the object we get back when calling Beautiful Soup on our website. And we are looking for the ID comic image. And if there's no image on the page, then we're going to print out that we could not find a comic image. Otherwise, we are going to get the source tag from the website, which is where the image is stored. And then we are going to download this image. And while we're doing that, we are also printing out that we are downloading that particular image. After that, we of course still need to save our image to our XKCD folder that we created. And for that, we are going to use our open function here. And since what we get back from the comic URL is quite long, we just want to have the end of it. So we're using base name, and we are then going to join that into our XKCD folder. We are then iterating over the content, writing that to our image file, and of course at the end we need to close our image file. And to navigate from one page to the other, we are going to get the respective link, and then we are going to append that so that we properly switch from one page to the other. If we have another look at the XKCD website, we can see that the only thing that basically changes when we switch from one page to the other is that ID at the end. So that's basically what we are going to update. So let's run this program now. And we can see a long list of different entries where it's downloading one image after the other. Now this could take quite a long while, so let's skip forward. And then let's have a look at our folder. And we can see in here we have the various different images that are being added. So we have them downloaded and available to us. We can also control the browser directly. And for that we can use Selenium. In order to use Selenium, we first need to install it. We can do that by heading over to the gear icon and adding Selenium as a package. And this is going to install Selenium as well as dependencies. Additionally, we can install Selenium through the command line by typing in pip install --user Selenium. And once Selenium is installed, we can go ahead and say that from Selenium we are going to import Webdriver. And then we can call webdriver.firefox, for instance, to open a new Firefox session, which is controlled by Selenium. This is going to open a new browser session, and we can see on the top left side, if we hover over that the browser is now remote controlled. We can also see that in code by typing in type browser. And here we can see that we have indeed a Selenium browser that's currently active. Now, in order to actually navigate to a different website, we can type in browser.get and then the URL to which we want to switch. And this is going to navigate to that particular page. If you encounter an error that Gecko driver is not executable from path, you can navigate over to the Gecko driver release page, also linked in the description down below, to download the latest version of Gecko driver, and then you can move the Gecko driver executables to the path. We can not only open web pages using Selenium and WebDriver, but we can also find certain elements on a page. Here's an example. Once we import WebDriver from Selenium and we open a new browser session, we are then getting the website here, and then we use find element by class name to search for a certain attribute with a specific class name. If we have found that element, then we can print this out. Alternatively, we are going to print out that we were not able to find this element. So let's run our program, and this is going to open a new browser session here controlled by Selenium, and we navigate over to this website. And if we right click and select view page source, we can have a look at the HTML. And if we scroll down a bit, we can see that we have an image here with a class of cover thumb. And that's exactly what we get back here. So if we have a look at the output, we can see that Selenium found an image tag element with that specified class name. But we can go a step further, and Selenium can, for example, also click websites and even fill out forms and really do most of what regular users can do. So let's again open a new browser session here with Selenium. Then we are navigating to a certain website. And if we have a look at that, we can see we are on the same website as before, inventwithpython.com. So we navigated to this website. And if we have a closer look at the website, we can see that we have a number of different buttons, including the read online for free button. And we can use Selenium to trigger that button and to click that button. To do that, we would first use the find element by link text function and then pass the text to it, and we are going to store that result in link element. After that, we can simply call the click function on the element, and that's going to trigger the click. So if we now take a look at our Selenium session in Firefox, we can see that we switched over to that page. So we used Selenium to navigate to the page and then to click the button. And in a similar way, we could fill out forms, for example. We could use the browser back and forward buttons and really control most of the browser. Let's have a look at the practice questions. The first one is to briefly describe the differences between the web browser requests, BS4 and Selenium modules. So the web browser module is pretty simple. It has an open method which can be used to open a web browser with a specified URL, and that's pretty much it. The requests module can be used to download files and data. The BS4 or Beautiful Soup module parses HTML. And the Selenium module is probably the most powerful. It is used to launch and control a browser. What type of object is returned by requests.get? And how can we access the downloaded content as a string value? So the requests.get function returns a response object, and the response object has a text attribute that includes the downloaded content as a string. What requests method checks that the download worked? So we saw before that we can use the raise for status method, which raises an exception if the download had any problems and doesn't do anything if the download succeeded. How can you get the HTTP status code of a request response? So we can use the status code attribute for that, which is part of the response object, and that's going to include the HTTP status code. How do you save a request's response to a file? So we first need to open a new file on our computer in the WB or write binary mode, and then we use a for loop to iterate over the response object's iter_content method. So let's take a look at that in code. Here we can see that we first of all open a new file, and again we use a WB argument, which stands for write binary mode, and then we use iter_content to iterate over the response and then to write different chunks to the new file that we just opened. What is a keyboard shortcut for opening a browser's development tools? So in Windows that's simply F12, at least when we use Chrome. And in Firefox we can press Ctrl+Shift+C on both Windows and Linux and Command-Option-C on Mac. How can you view in the developer tools the HTML of a specific element on a web page? So for that we can just right-click the element in the page and then select Inspect Element from the drop-down menu. What is the CSS selector string that would find the element with an ID attribute of main? So for that we would simply write #main to find that element. What is the CSS selector string that would find the elements with a CSS class of highlight? Since we're looking for a class, we need to start with a dot, followed by the name, so .highlight. What is the CSS selector string that would find all the div elements inside other div elements? For that we would write div space div, because we first want to navigate to the first div and then to the second div inside of the first div. What is the CSS selector string that would find the button element with a value attribute set to favorite? So for this we are looking for the button element, and then in brackets we're writing value and set that equal to favorite to search for that specific value. Say you have a beautiful soup tag object stored in the variable spam for the element div hello world. How could you get a string hello world from the tag object? So for that we would call getText on the spam object. How would you store all the attributes of a beautiful soup tag object in a variable named link element? So for that we would write link element dot attributes, so attrs. Running import Selenium doesn't work. How do you properly import the Selenium module? So for that it's necessary to say from Selenium import Webbrowser, and that's properly going to import Selenium. What's the difference between the find element and find elements method? So the find element method is going to return the first matching element as a web element object. The find elements method on the other side is going to return all the matching elements. So find element is only going to return one element, find elements is going to return a list of all the matching elements. What methods do Selenium's web element objects have for simulating mouse clicks and keyboard keys? So for clicks we would use the click method, and for keyboard keys we would use send keys as a method. You could call send keys.enter on the submit button's web element object, but what is an easier way to submit a form with Selenium? So for this we can call the submit method on any element within a form, which then submits the form. How can you simulate clicking a browser's forward, back and refresh buttons with Selenium? So for that we have three different methods available to us, the forward, back and refresh methods, which simulate the browser buttons. In this video we learned how we can use Python to automate actions on the internet and, for example, retrieve some websites or even navigate web pages. We learned about the Webbrowser module to open pages, the requests module to download data, and also beautiful soup to navigate the HTML. Then we also looked at the Selenium module, which basically emulates a user interacting with an actual browser. In the next video we are going to cover how to work with Excel files using Python. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to the channel and see you guys in the next video.